Earlier today, Venezuela announced the deployment of drones, soldiers, and a number of naval vessels to counter what they believe is a coming U.S. military operation with a goal of regime change. So let's get into what we know. Starting out, this video is shared by the Venezuelan defense minister, and according to some reporting in CBS News in an article titled, "Venezuela deploys warships, drones after U.S. sends guided missile destroyers to the region." Quote, "In a video on social media, Venezuela Defense Minister announced a significant drone deployment as well as naval patrols along its Caribbean coast, including larger vessels further north in our territorial waters. Venezuela's Defense Minister, Pedro Lopez, ordered the deployment of drones, naval vessels, and 15,000 troops to border waters and rivers, reacting to U.S. warships in the Caribbean. Caracas, the capital of Venezuela, labeled the presence of a U.S. nuclear submarine a, quote, grave threat to regional stability, and on Tuesday, Caracas petitioned the United Nations to intervene in the dispute by demanding the immediate cessation of the U.S. military deployment in the Caribbean. A couple key notes here. In terms of firepower and capabilities, Venezuela is far outmatched by the United States. That's not close. That's not really up for debate. And likely any sort of attack against the U.S. military in international waters right now would result in catastrophic consequences for Maduro and his regime. No doubt. One thing to keep in mind here when looking at the drones in Venezuela, best to consider these along the lines of what the Houthis were using off the coast of Yemen. So the Iranian Shahed-style drones or the Russian Garan-style large one-way attack-style drones, inexpensive drones. There has been talk, even mentioned by Secretary of State Marco Rubio in recent months, that Venezuela is trying to stand up their own domestic manufacture of those drones. It's not clear if they have, and it's not clear if they've been on the receiving end of exports from Iran or Russia. They are close allies with those two nations as well as China, but I haven't seen anything to suggest they actually have those munitions on hand. Either way, the major concern at this point, if we're looking at what could lead to broader escalation, would be the use of those long-range drones against U.S. military vessels in international waters as they approach Venezuelan territorial waters. I would not right now list as a significant concern of Venezuela trying in any way, shape, or form to necessarily attack the United States. Now, Venezuelan President Maduro put out a statement saying, quote, "What they're threatening to do against Venezuela, a government change, a military terrorist attack, is immoral, criminal, and illegal. Anyone who commits an act of aggression against a country in Latin America is attacking all countries." Now, it's worth mentioning what the U.S. military buildup in the region is, and it's changing. And from what I can tell, from the initial order to today, it has ramped up pretty significantly. Quoting Eric Schmidt in the New York Times a couple days ago, he said, quote, "U.S. officials said up to 3 guided missile destroyers would soon arrive in the region. The naval warships will target boats operated by drug cartels transporting fentanyl to the United States. They have not yet said how they will do so." So the stated U.S. mission here is really twofold. Primarily, it is clamping down on, in terms of the military presence, it's clamping down on the drug trade. It is intercepting cartel shipments or fentanyl shipments being sent to the north. We're going to need to get a cartel expert or drug trafficking expert in here to find out how much of that could actually be interdicted by the U.S. Navy. The Navy, no doubt, has that capability. It's not their primary mission set, but they are capable of accomplishing that sort of task. Secondary is what we've seen in recent weeks is that the U.S. labeled Maduro the head of a cartel and increased the reward to $50 million for any information leading to his arrest. So we can't separate that entirely from the arrival of U.S. military vessels off the coast of Venezuela. But continuing on with the deployment of U.S. assets in the region, looking at Ian Ellis here, citing USNI. We've got the guided missile destroyer USS Lake Erie. We've got the Iwo Jima Amphibious Ready Group is underway en route to Southcom. That's the USS Iwo Jima, the USS Fort Lauderdale, and the USS San Antonio. Included in that is the 22nd Marine Expeditionary Unit with 2,200 Marines. We've got the USS Gravely. These are guided missile destroyers. The USS Jason Dunham, and then the USS Minneapolis St. Paul, which is a littoral combat ship, and then the USS Sampson, another guided missile destroyer, is still south of Panama. And it sounds like the fast attack submarine remains unidentified, but several have been active off the coast in August, off the east coast of the United States in August, and then we've got reconnaissance aircraft overhead. That is a sizable deployment, no matter how you look at it. Again, the stated mission set from the United States is counter-drug, stopping the trafficking of fentanyl north, but that's a lot of firepower to arrive off of someone's coast. Now, the middle ground here is the idea that this is really just trying to pressure the Maduro regime, maybe pressure some folks inside the government to stand up and topple Maduro, or maybe pressuring Maduro to take different actions day in and day out. And that's the stance taken by Phil Gunson of the International Crisis Group, who told AFP earlier today, quote, "I think what we're seeing represents an attempt to create anxiety in government circles and force Maduro to negotiate something." So we have to keep that in mind, because we've got, between the U.S. statement and the Venezuelan statements kind of on opposite ends. That is probably the most likely scenario, is this is just trying to pressure Maduro into doing something. Now, the argument for regime change is being made, and we're seeing this pop up more and more in recent days. I want to run through an op-ed that was posted in The Hill publication here in the United States earlier today by Arturo McFields, where he says, quote, "The United States should overthrow Maduro in Venezuela." This case is being made. It's being presented. I don't know how seriously it's being taken or if this is a genuine thought, but it's enough out there to get published in a major organization with significant readership. He says, quote, "President Trump's war against the drug cartels has started, and Venezuelan's dictator Nicolas Maduro is its poster child and the target of a possible imminent U.S. military operation. Regime change in Venezuela would deal a devastating blow to the agendas of China, Russia, and Iran in the Western Hemisphere. The United States would make it clear that the use of force is an option when it comes to guaranteeing a safe and prosperous hemisphere, and would reaffirm that the Americas are a priority for the United States. This is also a direct message to Mexico, which would also note Trump's willingness to confront drug trafficking with all the military power at his disposal, not as an empty promise, but as a national security determination. In other words, the Mexican government must break what the Trump administration considers an intolerable alliance with drug cartels." And real quick, this is kind of tying in with some reporting we got last week. We had an interview with Ken Klippenstein where he was talking about how the DOD has changed up and started presenting target packets, putting together target packets for cartel leadership, suggesting there might be lethal operations in the near future going after some of those cartel leaders in Mexico. That would be a notable change from how we've operated in the past, but it does kind of line up with what the author McFields is saying here. He says regime change would economically benefit Venezuela and the United States, while China and Iran's control over the world's largest oil reserves would be weakened. Increased oil production in Venezuela under a democratic government would lower gas prices in the United States and improve the quality of life for Venezuelans, therefore reducing migration. And this last part makes me very nervous, because this is the kind of thing that's very easy to say, and if we ever plan off of this, I think it's where we get ourselves in trouble. He says the United States is interested in setting a precedent, not a protracted and costly war, a precise surgical action that encourages a significant change without boots on the ground. The narco dictator of Venezuela is already cornered and concerned, and the United States is determined and devoted to fight the drug cartels. An unprecedented problem requires an unprecedented response. No doubt Maduro is a bad dude, and there's a lot of people in Venezuela that would like to see him go. There's no question about that at all. Anytime we look at a military operation and say, here's the deal, here's how we're going to do it. Quick, painless, no boots on the ground, mission accomplished, we get what we want, it's wins all around. It's just too good to be true. There's just so few times that really works out at all. And if there's some part of our thinking, some part of our strategic planning that it could go like that, even if we're saying, it's a 25% chance that everything just goes perfectly and we don't have to risk anyone and it's flawless, I think that really sets us up for failure long term. All right, so a couple things I'm going to be keeping an eye on here in the next couple days. U.S. news media coverage of all of this, and then the status of the Venezuelan military. So when looking at U.S. media coverage, it's like not there at all, which is crazy right now when you really think about it. Maybe shows how chaotic our news cycle is, but we've got a sizable U.S. military deployment heading south, and the country that they are heading to or nearby is deploying their military assets in preparation of what they think could be offensive strikes. That's pretty wild to be happening in Venezuela, and it's just not getting coverage hardly at all. So, if we see an increase in U.S. media coverage or more politicians openly and willingly kind of bringing this up, maybe leading their news segments with this, it could be an indication that something is getting ready to happen. Conversely, looking at Venezuela, let's see what happens with their military. We've seen an increase in their posture, and they're kind of preparing, they say, for the arrival of the U.S. military. Look, each one of these is kind of a step closer and closer to the possibility of a hot war, a shooting war. I don't think we're that close right now, but the movement of U.S. military assets south moves us a little bit closer. The movement of Venezuelan military resources to the border and the deployment of drones moves us a little bit closer. So what's next? Do they maintain that posture? Do they push out further into their territorial waters? That's the kind of stuff that's going to be worth keeping an eye on here in the short term. But that's all we got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.